Hello, everyone. I'm Allison Leary, a lawyer for the League of California Cities and the chair of YLS. Welcome to the first of our three-part speaker series for young professionals. Thank you for leading by example and supporting our community and United Way. None of this event today or our work in the community year-round would be possible without the generous support of individual donors or our presenting event sponsor, Deloitte, and our community sponsors, SMUD, Safe Credit Union, and the Lesqua Sawyer family. This has been a truly unprecedented year. I would say that we were all in the same boat, but truthfully, we're all in the same storm. Some of us have very different experiences and access to resources, so our boats are not all the same.
I'm so grateful for the funds because, there are things that we need that doesn't stop just because the world is sick. Our children need clothes and shoes and food, and those things are very essential. And it's hard because if your job is not essential, you're no longer able to provide.
This is why I'm so proud to be part of United Way through YLS. For only $100 a year, YLS members are empowered to support United Way's mission through regular volunteer projects, networking, educational programming, and community engagement opportunities. As a membership, we've raised over $100,000 through the years for United Way's Square One project, which seeks to lift fellow Sacramentans out of poverty through education and family outreach. As I mentioned earlier, we're all in the same storm that is 2020, which I think I can safely say has been stressful for everyone. That is why I'm so excited to introduce tonight's speaker, Celeste Sekigahama. Celeste is the interim executive director at the Yoga Seed Collective and has over 5 years of yoga teaching experience. She has mostly taught in non-traditional settings such as in jails, psychiatric hospitals, youth detention facilities, and with sexual assault survivor groups. Her background includes a degree in feminist studies as well as 500 plus hours of yoga teacher training. She has also earned a certification for women in leadership from Cornell. Given her wealth of experience, I'm certain we will all learn something valuable tonight. Without further ado, Celeste.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm really excited. Let me just get my screen sharing going for everyone and we can get started. Yeah, so I titled this presentation Self-Care 2020. I've been doing self-care seminars and things like this for a while, but it does feel really different this year, right? So we'll talk specifically about self-care tips during this time as well as general self-care. So a little bit about me, as Allison already mentioned. Thank you for that introduction, Allison. I have 500 hours of yoga teaching experience. I have a background in feminist studies. And in addition to working at Yoga Seed, where actually I'm now director of finance and operations, we have a different executive director. I was so happy to have her step in and fill that role. But in addition to that, I do self-care coaching and consulting. And I will have information on the end if you're interested at the end, if you're interested in working with me for that. So I do it one-on-one, and I do group stuff as well. I'm also passionate about trauma-informed care, which is going to be really relevant to this talk. It's really relevant to this year. And we'll delve into a little bit more what trauma-informed means and why trauma-informed self-care is important. And I'm dedicated to helping others unlearn damaging beliefs. We'll delve into that a little bit too, what I mean by that in this presentation. It has to do with kind of wellness and diet culture and the things that they have us think that we need for self-care, which we really don't need. All right, so what's it gonna look like? Tonight on the agenda, we'll talk about what self-care is and why it is important. We're gonna talk about some myths about self-care. So that's what I was talking about earlier about unlearning damaging beliefs, yeah. And then what I call the 4 M's of self-care. So those are kind of the basic foundations for self-care. And then we're going to talk about the impact of toxic stress. And then how to decide what the right action is for you at this moment. And then a couple tips and techniques, as well as we're going to do some simple yoga movements. We're going to do some simple breath exercises. And if there's time, I'd like to end with a relaxing meditation. Great. So first things first. And again, I know that Kyla mentioned this, but just to say, if there's any questions, there will be time at the end for question and answers. And you can also just drop some questions in the Q&A box, and we can get to those later. So I'd love to start by reframing self-care. So often when we hear the word self-care, they're used to sell us a product, really, whether it's a shampoo, a latte, a gym membership, whatever it is. The commercialization of the term self-care, I think, has really made it confusing and has made the real heart of self-care get lost in all of that. So it's not tied to a specific product. Yeah. And that may sound really self-explanatory, but I think we don't realize how much we've been conditioned to tie it to products and things, right? It's not exclusive to certain groups of people. A lot of times when you see advertisements that talk about self-care, there's a certain group of people that show up in them all the time while others are not represented. Yeah, but it's for everybody. It's not for a certain group of people. It's not always pretty. So a lot of times when we're shown images of what self-care looks like, it's this beautiful setting. It's the most tranquil space you've been. You have beautiful flowers everywhere. And the reality is self-care is a day-to-day thing, and it can't always look like that, right? And that doesn't mean that you're not doing self-care if you don't have access to those things. It's not the same for everybody. It's going to look really different what you need versus what I need versus what somebody else needs. And that being said, it's also not going to look the same for you every day. So it's not as if you will get a self-care routine down and then you're done and then you can cross it off your list, right? It's a little more involved than that, or at least in the way that I look at self-care. Okay, so these are some images that when I looked up the words self-care, this is what came up. And I'm using these images right now because I'm using them to illustrate what I was talking about in what we need to reframe, right? So the first image all the way on the left of the bathtub with the beautiful flowers and the fresh fruit and the candles and the gorgeous water that I have no idea where that water came from because it looks crazy blue. That is an example of very pretty self-care, which most of us don't have access to all the time, let alone maybe even time to take a bath, right? And then the next image to the right of that is it looks like a woman sitting, meditating, beautiful location, right? Sun is shining, palm trees. Again, we don't always have access to that. And I also wanted to use this image because I want to point out that meditation does not have to look like this. Meditation does not have to be, I'm sitting quietly, have my hands in a specific position, I'm tuning everything out. And actually, that's a really hard place for most people to start. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with people and they're like, meditation's just not for me. I just can't do it. I can't sit quiet. Most of us are not used to doing that. Our brain isn't really trained to doing that. So there's some easier pathways into meditation that don't involve this idealistic view of it. Okay, the next thing over is this gorgeous fruit and yogurt and milk combination here, which again, we don't always have access to fresh fruit. We maybe don't always have access to the most nourishing things for our bodies, whether it's lack of time, lack of resources, whatever it is. But that's not the only way that you can self-care. And in fact, if you are down on yourself for not being able to eat the freshest fruit or because you went for the pizza instead, that's going to do the opposite of what you want to do with self-care, right? It's just going to get you into a space where you're thinking negatively about yourself. And that's not helpful for anybody, right? And then the last picture is just to illustrate usually who self-care is marketed to. It's usually marketed to women. It's usually marketed to women of, younger, maybe to middle age. They're usually thin, and they usually have beautiful spaces to hang out in. I mean, I don't really know how much self-care they need. No, I mean, that's not true. Everyone needs self-care, but not everyone has access to these beautiful things, right? Okay, so that's just to illustrate my point. Now let's talk about what self-care is. Yeah. So self-care is about prioritizing yourself, both mentally and physically. It is about recognizing your needs in the present moment and responding to them. It is measured not by outward signs of success or happiness, perfect job, perfect relationship, perfect workout routine, but the experience of contentment. Okay. And I think that that's really important. Pointing out that it's not measured by those outward signs of success, like the perfect job, the perfect relationship, all of that. Because so many times people think, oh, I have this down, right? I don't understand why I'm not happy because I have this great job. I have a great relationship. I work out 3 times a day, or 3 times a day, maybe 3 times a week, whatever it is. I have all this down. Why do I still feel unhappy in some way in myself? And that's because we're taught to see these outward signs of success as signs of inner happiness and contentment, which they don't necessarily line up. Sure, they help. And I'm not saying those are negative. All I'm saying is those are not the perfect indicators for you being fully taking care of yourself. Yeah. Okay. So why do I do trauma-informed self-care coaching? Why aren't I just a self-care coach? Why don't I call myself that? One reason is the prevalence of trauma. Chances are every person listening to this right now, or most of us, have experienced some form of trauma. Whether that trauma be global, the pandemic, for instance, or whether it be more individual, whether it be one event, whether it be multiple events, whether it be, a situation of just constant stress through your life. Trauma is really prevalent. Yeah. And the effects of trauma, will go a little bit more into them. But for the purpose of trauma-informed self-care coaching, what I want to say is that the effects of trauma make it so that not everybody has access to the same tools of mindfulness or self-care. So you really need to make it individualized. If you're going to be trauma-informed, you have to meet people where they are at. And that is what I am all about. So for example, if somebody has had maybe surgery on their lungs, maybe breathing exercises are really going to bring up some really traumatic things for them. So then I'm going to work at a different angle, right? And then self-care interventions. So self-care is the methods that I use, movement, mindfulness, all of that stuff, they're really proven to help reduce stress. So that's why trauma-informed self-care coaching. So the 4 M's, this is what I talked about in the beginning. These are what I call the main points of mindfulness. So movement, moving your body in one way or another. Mindfulness, and that that equates to, or can equate to, almost every part of your life. Meditation, which again, as I mentioned, does not have to look that specific way. There's walking meditation, there's body scan meditation, there's movement meditation, there's plenty of different kinds. And then motivation, right? So all of that is great, but if you don't find a reason to stay motivated and to keep up with your self-care, it's pretty much all going to be for naught, right? You can have all that knowledge, but if you don't have the motivation to continue to implement it, then you're kind of dead in the water, right? Oh, wait. So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about the impact of toxic stress. So toxic stress, what it essentially means is high levels of sort of constant stress that you're feeling. So the reason that we experience something like toxic stress is because we get in, our nervous system gets in this state where we're always waiting for danger. Yeah. We're always waiting for something to come. So what happens is our body, with that level of stress, because our body doesn't know the difference between the stress of, I better move out of the way, a car is going to hit me, and I'm stressed because my boss yelled at me. Our body reacts the same. Yeah. So what happens is things like blood rushes to the major muscles of the legs and the arms, so you can fight or flee. Your heart rate will speed up, right? Your breathing may get faster. So things tend to speed up when you're stressed, and it's to prepare you to get ready for fight or flight. Okay. And then what happens at the same time is certain things stop or slow down. So for example, your digestive system, you don't need to be digesting food when you're escaping from danger. So your digestive system slows down. And so that's why if you're constantly in this state of toxic stress, of constant stress, it can negatively impact 7 out of the 11 systems that make the human body function, including the nervous and digestive system. Because like I said, one's going to be highly activated, one's going to be really depressed or repress the digestive system. And you need the balance of, some stress is good, but you need the balance of that rest as well. And when you're in constant stress, it can cause a disconnection from your body, from sensations in your body, from emotions, feelings, things like that. Because what happens is it really gets too much mentally for you. And it's much easier at that point to disconnect, than to try and deal, especially if you don't know how to deal with everything that's going on. So all of this can lead to pretty serious illness and disease. And it can also impact interpersonal as well as professional relationships. If you're dealing with all of these health issues and mental issues that come with toxic stress, it's going to be really hard to be a productive, healthy person. Yeah. Okay. So I love to do a breath exercise right after I talk about all of the negative impacts of stress, because even hearing about it, that can kind of bring up a little bit of a stress response in it, right? When we're thinking about it. So what I'd love to have us do is do a quick breath exercise together. Okay. So I'm going to invite you to get comfortable wherever you're seated. Maybe you can start to lean back into the chair, feeling the support of the chair. It'd be great if your feet could touch the floor, feet planted on the floor. If that doesn't work, don't worry about it. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to take our hand. We're going to make this like hang loose thing, right? Where the pinky is out, the thumb is out, the rest of the 3 fingers are bent. Okay. And then what we're going to do with the thumb, I'm going to cover one nostril. It doesn't matter which one. We're going to do both sides. Okay. And then the opposite nostril, I'm going to take a breath in. I'm going to hold it at the top. And then I'm going to switch, right? So now my pinky is covering the opposite nostril. And now I'm going to breathe out of the exposed nostril. Take a breath in, same nostril. You switch at the top, breathe out. Breathe in. Go ahead and switch. Breathe out. Nice. Let's do that one more time. Breathe in. Switch. Breathe out. Nice. Let that hand go. Take a moment to notice if you feel any different. It's okay if you don't. That was rather quick. All right, so that's just one type of breath exercise that can help to calm you down. If you're in a workspace or a space where it might feel awkward to be doing this, you can also just take deep breaths. We really underestimate the power of deep breath to help calm your nervous system down. Okay. Breath is actually the link between that like stressed state that our nervous system can get into and then our calm state that the nervous system, needs at times. So if you use the breath, it can actually kind of switch your nervous system to start to activate the calming side, especially if you make your exhales longer than your inhales. So exhale longer than the inhale. And what that's going to do, that's going to send a signal to your brain that it's time to chill. Yeah, that it's time to calm down. So just simple breath work can be really powerful. Yeah. If you're in a stressful meeting, whatever it is, you can kind of take deep breaths to yourself and notice if there's any difference. Okay. All right. So normally I do this self-care a little more interactive than I get to do it today, but that's okay. So I love this question. Is this self-care? If you sit on the couch, if you watch Netflix, if you become a couch potato for hours at a time, are you practicing self-care? Yeah. Maybe I'll give a moment if anyone wants to, sorry about that. Maybe I'll give a moment if anyone wants to guess in the chat whether they believe that sitting, watching Netflix for hours at a time, zoning out, is that self-care? Okay. So some people said yes. Some people said they're worried about their Netflix habit. Depends on person, how often, depends. If small moderation, great. Thank you so much for those responses. And that's essentially what I want to say is that it's personal. Like I talked about at the beginning, this can be self-care, right? And I think especially in our culture, we have this tendency to beat ourselves up when we're not productive in some way, even with our self-care. Like if I didn't take a bubble bath and do what I usually do, then it wasn't self-care. And if it doesn't give me some result or some beautiful picture, it wasn't self-care. And that's not true, right? That being said, just zoning out may not be the self-care that you need at the time. Really, what's most important is that you figure out what works for you by noticing not just how you feel during it, okay? So while you're binging whatever it is you want to binge, it may feel really good. It may feel like, oh, thank God I get a break. But then right after or 5 minutes after or 10 minutes after, you start to feel like, ugh, God, that I don't feel good. Like my body doesn't feel good. My mind doesn't feel great. Well, then maybe that wasn't self-care. So what's really important is to take stock, to notice how you feel after. So Notice how you feel 5 minutes after you do something like that. Notice how you feel half an hour after you do something like that. Notice how you feel at the end of the day after you did a 2-hour Netflix binge, right? And sometimes you'll be like, oh, that was the wrong choice. And sometimes you'd be like, that was the right choice. My body needed that, right? But it's just really about tuning in, of not basing what you need on anything that any outside influence or what worked for you before necessarily, right? You have to be paying attention to your body in the moment. And that's why things like yoga and mindfulness are so essential to self-care, because you have to be able to pick up on the signals that your body is giving in order to respond to them, right? Because a lot of our culture, we spend a lot of time ignoring that and responding to the outside world. So some sort of practice where you're tuning into yourself and your own needs is really going to help you to gain some sort of awareness around, what does self-care look like for you? Yeah. And maybe it's this. Great. All right. So you may be asking yourself, what do I do though? I want specific things that I can do now. Okay. So the first thing that I'm going to recommend is start small. A lot of times, if we get excited about an idea, whether it's self-care or working out or some self-improvement, we're like, I'm going to do it every day. I'm going to go full force. I am so ready for this. And then 2 weeks later, you've petered totally out because what you wanted to do was unsustainable for your life. And maybe it would have been sustainable later on if you did it incrementally, but to go from 0 to 60 usually doesn't work. Yeah. Especially with something like self-care. So start really small. Find one small thing that you can do for yourself tomorrow, whether it's, I'm going to make sure that I drink enough water during the day, whether that means like, I'm going to have 3 water bottles full. I'm going to have 1, I'm going to have 2, whatever that looks like for you. Tomorrow, I'm going to drink a lot of water. Okay. So that's a good example of something starting small. Play guitar. I love that. Yes. Play guitar can be self-care for sure. The other thing is find what motivates you, or another thing is find what motivates you. Because like I talked about in the beginning, if you don't have some reason to continue, some inner motivation, it's going to be a lot harder to keep up with this, right? Sorry, I just laughed because someone said they got called out for the water. No, I'm not calling anybody out. It's just a suggestion. Okay. So find what motivates you. And this doesn't have to just be about you. Although obviously the impetus should be, I want to take care of myself. It can be really helpful if you think about it in relation to other people as well. Like I take care of myself because I love myself, because I know I need it, but also because I know I'm going to show up as a better partner to my spouse. Also because I know I'm going to show up and be, more present with my kids, for example, or I'm going to be more helpful at my job or getting what I want done, right? So if you find something else outside of yourself too that motivates you, that can be really helpful. In Eastern culture, they say if you make it just about yourself, it's too small. So you need to bring it outside yourself. That being said, you may not resonate with that, and it may just be for you, but you just got to find what's motivating to you. Oh, playing piano. I love that. Yeah. Commit to change. That might be one of the hardest things of what you do now. It's easier to continue to blame the situation and continue to feel helpless than it is to take even small steps to change, right? A lot of us feel more comfortable in the devil we know, sort of, so to speak. We get comfortable with our shit, excuse me, but that was the best way I knew how to describe it. We get comfortable with our own issues, and we become sort of, in a way, complicit in it. I don't want to say complicit, but we just, it's easier to stay on that than it is to commit to change, right? And I'm sure many of you can relate to that feeling. So yeah. And then the other really important thing is be kind to yourself. Yeah. Because the truth is, sorry about that. Because the truth is, you're not going to be perfect at all times. Oops. You're going to mess up. I actually didn't do my meditation this morning, and usually I meditate, 20 to 30 minutes a day. Okay. If I use that as an excuse to beat myself up, then it's the opposite of self-care. If I use it as an opportunity of like, well, how do I feel today? Do I feel worse or better that I didn't do what I usually do? If I notice I feel better if I skip something, okay, well, maybe I don't need to do that as much as I thought. If I notice I feel worse, okay, tomorrow I'll do it. Yeah, I'll probably do it tomorrow because I know that it makes me feel better. I know that it's there. But if you get down into this shame spiral of, oh God, I missed it and I really need to be consistent, otherwise nothing's going to work and I screwed up, that's the opposite of self-care. Yeah. There's a saying that kind of a famous yoga instructor uses. I'm going to say shit again. Sorry. He says, if you bring your shit to yoga, your yoga will be shit. And that's sort of the same thing with self-care. If you bring all of your shit to self-care and say, and do this type A personality thing where it has to be perfect, well, then your self-care is probably not really going to be taking care of yourself fully. Okay. So be kind to yourself. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about tips specifically for self-care in 2020. So the first thing that I noticed that I really needed to regulate or modulate in 2020 is how much I'm taking in of outside news, the outside world. When there's a lot going on, we're all stressed about a lot of different things happening on global, on national levels. And yes, stay informed, but also allow tuning out. If you go a day without reading the news, without checking in to Instagram or Facebook, chances are you'll be fine, right? You maybe have a little bit of catch up tomorrow or the next day, right, to all the news that you missed, because there is a lot of news happening all the time. But it's going to be so much better for your mental health if you allow some space away from that instead of getting sucked into this constant 24-hour news cycle that we have going all the time, right? And maybe you're super worried about, I need to stay informed. Well, try an hour of not looking at things, right? This is all customizable to you. So I said a day, maybe it's an hour, maybe it's a month that you're like, I'm blocking all this out, right? But whatever it is, allow tuning out. Okay, creating a schedule or list. Our days, or I'll speak for myself, but I'm going to assume that some of you are experiencing the same thing. My day looks really different than it did pre-pandemic, and there's not the same level of going into a different location, interacting with people, getting to chat to my coworkers as I work, right? So keeping yourself accountable for whatever you have to do, job, family, self-care, making some sort of schedule or list can be super beneficial And for me, it's also super satisfying to cross something off a list, just a side note. But it can also be really beneficial to keeping you sort of in some sense of normalcy and routine throughout the day, which it's not really easy to have that sense of normalcy necessarily right now. So for some people, maybe a full schedule works. At 9 a.m., I'm going to, do this, check my email, work for an hour, at 10 a.m. eat breakfast, whatever it is. And for some people, maybe it's a list, and that can look super different, right? Like I said, maybe has it someone scheduled out like every half hour, and maybe someone's like, today's list is take a shower. And then you do that and you cross it off. Great, right? We're all going to be at really different spots. The third thing is go outside if you can. So I know that in California right now, that's not always the most accessible, right? I'm not encouraging you to go outside when the air quality is bad and there's smoke. But I do encourage you then, if you can't get outside, maybe sit by a window for at least some of the time that you are working, getting some sunlight. And this actually goes into the next thing I'm going to talk about, which is sleep. Because if you are inside all the time and you're completely cut off from the sun, what happens is your circadian rhythm gets out of whack and it's harder for you to sleep. We need the sun as sort of that natural indicator. So that's part of the reason why going outside, seeing sunlight, having open windows is really beneficial. Okay. And then, sleep. Sleep is a huge one. I usually like to ask, does anybody feel like they're getting enough sleep? And in the amount of times I've done this seminar, very rarely is someone like, oh yeah, me. No, I'm getting plenty of sleep. Thanks. Right. A lot of us, it's a symptom of our culture again to not only devalue sleep, but because we're all stressed out, just not even be able to sleep, even if you do value it, right? But actually they're doing more and more studies on how much sleep health can affect your overall health and how important it is. So there are a lot of tips if you are a troubled sleeper that can help you get more restful sleep. So for example, one thing that they say, no screens half hour before bed, TV, phone, any of that, no screens half hour before bed, right? And I want to say, these are all just suggestions, okay? So if that doesn't work for you, no problem. I just want to give some hints because sleeping is such a huge one. The other thing that is recommended, don't use your bed for other things. Like don't work from bed during the day if you're not feeling like getting up. Don't sit in bed and read for a long time, because you want your body, if you have trouble sleeping, generally you want your body to just equate the bed with sleep, and that's it, right? And that can help ease the transition. If your body doesn't get into the habit of bed equals all these other things, sometimes sleep, but rarely, it makes it harder to maintain a good sleep schedule, right? I mean, there's other things like avoiding chocolate toward the end of the night. All these things, you got to find what works for you. And that being said, like I said, this is different for everybody. I read every night before I go to bed, and I have to, and that's just me. I mean, I found what works for me, and it doesn't necessarily equate to what the suggested things are, right? So, take these all with a grain of salt. It's all based on individual experience. And then maintain connections. Yeah, that for some of us is really hard right now. Yeah, maintain connections outside of who is in your household, who you are currently with right now. And I think that can be especially hard because when we've worked all day on a Zoom call or on a screen, the last thing that we want to do is now get on another screen and talk to somebody, right? I think especially at this point, we're all kind of in the midst of Zoom fatigue full on. So try and get creative. Yeah, zoomed out. Try and get creative with how you maintain those connections. You know, maybe it's writing letters like people used to. Like, wouldn't it be cool to get letters in the mail during this time and maybe send pictures or something? Maybe, you know, it's social distance hangouts in backyards, at parks, whatever, like socially responsible in-person ones. So someone's been sending greeting cards. I love that. Yeah. So trying to get, trying to get that connection in the best way possible. And also with that, with the maintaining connections, sort of the flip side of that is also keeping clear boundaries. Yeah. And I know that boundaries is a big thing when it comes to self-care. I feel like I always hear it mentioned around self-care. So if your family, you know, has, I don't know, family Zoom meetings every Friday and you are just burnt out, you need to be able to set that boundary for yourself and say, hey, look, I love you all, or whatever it is, but I need this for myself. I need this time for myself, right? So maintaining connections, but also maintaining boundaries and not feeling guilty. That's probably the hardest part for some of us, right? Not feeling guilty when you turn things down, when you say no. And I think for either of us, whether you're an introvert and extrovert, one of those is going to be harder than the other. The maintaining connections might be harder, or the maintaining boundaries might be harder. So you'll know based on your personality which way is going to be a little bit harder for you. Okay. Recognize diminished capacity. So we all have really a certain amount of emotional capacity to deal with emotional things. And because we're in a pandemic right now, there's a certain level of emotional capacity that is just sort of constantly being used up right now. So if you're noticing, I'm more tired, maybe I'm crying more at things. Yeah, maybe like I need a nap during the day because I just feel burnt out. I react, I snap at things when I didn't before. That's all part of diminished capacity. And that is a completely valid and common response to a trauma that we're all in, right? So recognize that and be mindful of that, not just in yourself, but maybe in your coworkers and people that you work with, right? Be kind to others as well as yourself around this. And it will make it a little bit easier to deal with if we all realize, you know, like was mentioned by Allison earlier, we're all in the same storm. We have different boats. And so we may react differently to this, but chances are we're going to have some emotional reaction, right? So letting that be okay with yourself and your coworkers. And if you have a position of some sort of leadership in wherever you're working, normalizing this kind of thing can be really beneficial. Normalizing taking a nap. I know that sounds like the antithesis of American business, but normalize taking a nap in the middle of the day if you need to. Because the truth is, it doesn't decrease productivity, it increases productivity when people are taking care of themselves. And then the last thing I'm going to say for tips for self-care for 2020 is balancing that zoning out versus that tuning in, right? So zoning out can be really beneficial. Sometimes our brain kind of needs that break, right? But we also need the ability to tune in so that we can meet our needs where they're at, right? Okay, great. So now that we've talked about all this, I'd love to show just some simple movements that you can do any day. And that's really beneficial for us who are sitting a lot. I know I'm sitting more than ever during these times and are hunched over our computer like this, right? So I have pictures that I'm going to go through in this slide. I invite you to do the movement with me or with a picture, or just take note, okay? So the first one, this is a back stretch. So you see I'm using the back of the chair And I'm stretching my arms out as wide as I can. And I'm creating kind of a flat line with my back. Doesn't matter if I'm parallel to the floor. But this is going to stretch out the back and also the back of the legs and also the arms. So anybody who's familiar with yoga maybe has done, or even a little bit familiar, maybe knows the pose down dog. So this is a variation of that pose down dog, and it makes it so you don't have to put your hands on the floor if you're not in a place where you want to put your hands on the floor, right? So this pose, and then this pose. So hands behind you, opening up the chest. So I'm really, my fingers are interlaced and I'm pressing them down toward the floor. And what that's doing is really opening up the chest area, which is an area that starts to do this the more that we're on the computer or looking at our phone, and gets really tight, and it can create tightness in the shoulders and the neck. So opening that up, you can do this from a seat, right? That's going to be super beneficial. So this is just a picture of my wrists because I didn't know how to get a picture of this. Shaking your wrists, shaking or making circles with your ankles, any sort of movement of the joints, but especially the wrists, because they're getting a lot of work as we're doing this, is going to be really beneficial. And shaking actually is a natural way that we release tension. So if you notice, like, dogs, when they get scared, they go like, oh, and they might shake. And that's actually them like releasing the tension from their body. And we have that ability as well. Outer hip stretch. Okay. So the hips and the hip flexors, they're gonna probably feel it if you're sitting as much as we all are these days. So just this simple movement that I'm doing of the ankle over the knee, and then potentially you can lean forward while you're doing this. If you're not really feeling a stretch just sitting back, leaning forward can intensify the stretch. So those are just a few movements that I suggest that you try and work into your day. Yeah. Okay. We're running out of time, so I'm going to do a super quick seated meditation. So making sure you're in a comfortable seat, letting the arms relax where they are, letting the shoulders move away from the ears. See if you can notice the feeling of your legs on the chair. If your back is supported. Take a quick scan from the top of the head down through the body. See if you can just notice, just a quick scan. Notice, are there points of tension in your body? Are there places where you feel extra tight? That's not wrong. That's not bad. Just notice. All the way down to the toes. Maybe noticing a general feeling in the body. Is the body feeling light today? Is it feeling heavy? Is it feeling tight? Is it feeling loose? Nice deep breaths. Let's take a big breath in through the nose together. And then release out the mouth. Nice. So I love to do a longer meditation, but if you have access to YouTube, which I'm sure a lot of you do, there's a lot of free what's called body scan meditations where they take you through the entire body, relaxing it. And that can really help you start to tune into the signals of your body, which is going to help with your self-care. Okay. And then just last thing, if you'd like to connect with me, my other business besides Yoga Seed is Full Circle Strategy. So this is on my own, and I do trauma-informed and personalized self-care. I'm available for talks about self-care, about the dangers of the wellness industry as well. and also to work with you individually one-on-one. So if you're interested, you can jot down my number, my email. You can also reach out to United Way, and I'm sure they'll give you my information. And I'm going to stop screen share now. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Celeste. That was really wonderful. I felt like you were talking directly to me.
Oh,
I have
great.
a lot of those type A, high stress, lots of guilt feelings almost every day.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
really appreciate you taking the time to share these tips with us. We're going to go ahead and get started with the Q&A now. So if you guys have a question that you would like Celeste to answer, please go ahead and type it in the Q&A field. It looks like Eric was looking for some specific recommendations on ways to reduce stress and toxicity to ensure your body is performing well. And I know you went over some of them, but if you have any other ideas about that, I think we'd love to hear them.
Yeah, sure. So one thing that I'll say, toxic stress is different than what we think of as toxins or toxicity in your body. Toxic stress just means it's really high levels of stress. And breathing exercises, movement, all of that is great. I do want to mention, when you say toxicity, that's a word that is tossed around a lot, especially in wellness culture. And really, toxicity in your body, that's what your liver is for. That's what a lot of toxicity in your body is screened out naturally by your body if you have a healthy working body, right? So really just taking care of yourself in general, with movement, with meditation, with all of that, is going to help any toxins that are in your body, right?
Great, thank you. And then Stephen Lenz is asking if you have any recommendations about how much time we should set aside for our self-care.
See, that's a good question. And I get that one a lot. And people are like, well, how much time? What should I do? I wish that I had a prescription that was like, every human needs ABC. That's really not true. So it's really going to depend. I would say start, especially if you're new to self-care and you usually don't take time out for yourself, start small. Again, start with 5 minutes. See what 5 minutes does for you. 5 minutes of, maybe in the morning before you even get out of bed, 5 minutes of just relaxing, taking stock. See how that feels. Maybe you want more then, maybe you want less, but 5 minutes is a good place to start.
Great, thank you. And then I'm wondering if you mentioned there were some YouTube videos that were good for self-care. Do you know of any free apps that you might recommend for meditation or self-care? I see a ton of them, and it's hard to sort of sort through which ones might be good and which ones are less good.
Yeah. So the meditation apps that I like are not free, I'm going to be honest, but there is Insight Meditation app is one that is free. When I say like it, I just mean I have a preference for a different one. I love Headspace a lot. I love everything that they offer. So I highly recommend Headspace if you have a little bit of money. If you don't, to spend on that, trust me, I get it. So Insight is a meditation timer that's great. And like I said, I found a lot of great things on YouTube. Like I just type in body scan meditation, and there's anything from like a 10-minute to an hour and a half version. And it's all over the gamut really on YouTube of what you want. You can get such specific things for yourself that you really don't have to, if you don't want to invest money in it, have to. Yeah. But
Great.
Insight is a free one.
Awesome. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Yeah.
So I think that we're just about close to the end of our time here. So I really wanted to thank you on behalf of the YLS members and all of our attendees today for this incredibly insightful presentation. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. And then for all of the attendees, I want to make sure that everybody is aware that YLS does have a website, a brand new website redesigned by Laura Rincon on our YLS board. The URL for that is youngleadersuwccr.org. And you can learn more about becoming a member, about our upcoming events and volunteer activities there. And finally, we just want to make sure that you don't miss out on our next Remix presentation. It's going to be on October 27th on Community Leadership with Nihal Satyadev. So thank you all so much for your time. Hope you have a great evening.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Hope to hear from some of you.